I feel like the physical feel of it is very different. There's not a whole lot of that carries over, but on the mental side of things, it helps tremendously just being comfortable being uncomfortable.
Welcome to the Your Data Driven podcast. If you like this podcast, be sure to visit our website at yourdatadriven.com for more useful help and advice on setting up your race car, mastering data analysis, and driving faster. Welcome to episode 42. Today I'm delighted to welcome future Indycar star Lafond to the show. Originally from the USA, Andre is now pursuing his ambition to be a top-flight Indycar driver by racing Formula Ford here in the UK. In this show, we discuss what it takes to make that decision to go all in on a career driving racing cars. We talk about the role of coaching and how to give the most useful driver feedback to your engineers and crew. Andre also gives us some surprising tips on how he uses mountain biking to help with his mental as well as his physical preparation. So, without further ado, grab a pen, grab a coffee, and let's hear what Andre has to say. You may know that at the end of season 1, I wrote the Motorsports Playbook, a summary distilling the first 20 shows into nuggets of wisdom. I made the notes so that you don't have to. If you've not got it yet, go and grab yourself a copy from the website. So welcome, Andre.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Well, it's absolutely brilliant to have you on the show. A young and up-and-coming future racing star in our midst. I'm really excited, actually, to talk to you and get your views on a different aspect on driving and how we can think about that with our own racing. To understand a little bit more about you and the path that you're on, and just to see if there's one or two things that you've discovered or looking to learn or that could maybe help us in the amateur community be better drivers or better in general, that we can maybe go away and try. So, but I think your story is going to be absolutely fascinating for people listening. Yeah, so how does that sound? Is that a good challenge for the show?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Well, okay, let's get a bit about you. Who are you? What are you doing? What brings you here today?
Name is Andre Lafond. I'm a Haitian-American racing driver, currently driving in the Formula Ford National Series with Ammonite Motorsport. It's going to be my first full year in cars, so pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's here in the UK. So even though, for the benefit of our American listeners, he's actually come over to the right side of the pond. I
get to harangue the UK crowds by saying aluminum.
Oh my, really? You do that? Oh, yeah.
No.
Yeah. How's it going with the British humour anyway? Are you working that out?
I'm getting used to it. It's just, for me, the main cultural difference was just having different words for the same things. Okay.
Oh, like sway bar and anti-roll bar and things like that? Or
funnily enough, that I got to grips with very, very quickly. But one of the first days I was over here, I look at sitting down at a restaurant, I look at the menu and I see I'm like, what's a goujon? What's a gherkin? What is this? And then they're just like, oh, it's just a pickle. Oh, it's just a chicken finger. Oh.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, I'm sure there'll be many of these still to come for you. So I was just saying to you before we started, I think it's really fascinating to get your perspective, particularly as you're sort of young in your career, and just to get so you've made this kind of commitment to motorsports as your job. So tell us a little bit about that and what you've done before and what's given you that feeling that, okay, I'm going to give this my all.
So it's a bit of a longer question to answer, I should say. I'd have to maybe start at the beginning of my involvement in motorsports. Started out, I did some indoor electric karting for a little while. And after a couple visits to place me and my family went to, I got really good at it to the point where my dad was getting frustrated because he couldn't beat me anymore.
Oh, that's got to be painful for him. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he saw that, it's something I wanted to do. So we started looking into it together. And in 2018, we got the budget together to do a season of state champs in karts. And the team I drove for also did rentals. So some of my gear was coming out of the rental trailer. I didn't have, racing boots for most of it. I didn't have gloves. The suit I had was a suit that had been lent to me. So I raced in that. I would think I was second or third in the points by the end of the season, was on the podium almost the whole year. And I figured, this is what I want to do in life. It just feels right to me. It's what I love more than anything else. So then did some more karting. In 2020, I did my first national races with the Rotax Stars and Stripes series, and was, I think, fourth in the points by the end of that. So that was for my first year of national racing with relatively little karting experience. It was a big step up. Then looking to move into cars, tested with Team Pelfrey in the US. Test went really well. They wanted me to drive with them for the year, but that kind of, before we got everything in order, a driver who had tested with them prior swooped in and nabbed the last seat before we could fully work it out, which was a little bit frustrating, but in some ways a blessing in disguise, because he recommended us to Andy Lowe of Team Ammonite Motorsport. And this was the start of last year. And said, we want to help you, but we don't have a seat for you at the moment. And these guys are great. This racing over there is great. That's what we recommend you do. And that also left me and my dad scrambling last minute, trying to figure out, okay, how do we get an FIA license? Where am I going to live over there?
Yeah, there's a few logistical challenges, I think, that it'd be fair to say that it was just like, oh yeah, we'll just pop over and do that. It's like, there's several things in this story already. I'm thinking like, what else was going on when you were making these decisions? Because you sort of play it back as a nice story and something, but sort of a linear thing. But I can imagine there must have been some interesting conversations along the way of going like, are you sure this is for you? I don't know.
Yeah, it was crazy as a dream and as a profession it is. My parents have been very supportive, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. I feel like my dad has a fairly good level of understanding with motorsports because he rides motorcycles a lot. He's a big MotoGP fan. And he tried to persuade me to go down the motorcycle route for a little bit, but he saw that this was something I had a shot at and that I really, really loved. And he said, let's go for it.
Have you done much motorbike riding? Can you ride a bike and things like that?
I can, yeah. I've had a mini bike for a little while when I was little. Put that around. I've done a bit of dirt biking. That was really fun. But just cars just felt a little better.
The reason I ask actually specifically is because I've done quite a bit of coaching of drivers and taking drivers who aren't necessarily wanting to race cars and things, but this is, they need to have a certain level of experience and ability. So one of the things I used to do was evaluate them on low friction surfaces. It was amazing. You get these people come along and everyone picks it up, but some people pick it up really quickly. And invariably, the people who picked it up really quickly were the bike riders, the motorbike riders. And I was like, I wonder why that is. So it's been a little sort of pet kind of thing of mine that I was okay, you're a bike rider. Okay, that's maybe why you're picking up the car driving bit pretty quickly, because you haven't done that much, you say, and then yet you're still, doing okay. So
I had mini bikes for a while. One of my friends has recently got a pair of dirt bikes, and that was really fun. And at one point when we were riding, there was a gravel double track fire road, and he said, yeah, you can go pretty fast here. You can go wide open if you want. I'm like, yeah, cool. So I went, it was only a 5-speed, and I got to the top of 5th. At one point I started hitting the rev limiter. And, we get to the end, we stopped, and he's like, oh, how fast you were going. I'm like, I don't know. What's the top of 5th?
At which point he's like, oh?
Yeah. It was fun. Then but I do a fair bit of mountain biking.
Is that kind of a fitness thing, or just for because you're into that as well? And
It mainly started as a fitness thing, but then I realized it helps a lot as a form of mental prep work almost, because I find it teaches you some very important lessons, like thinking on your feet. It reinforces just looking further ahead, picking a line, just that mental space of pushing your limits, just going a little bit faster, seeing how much more you can take.
oh, you've got me thinking now. I mean, that's really fascinating. So I suppose if you're mountain bike, so that sort of downhill stuff, or you're just trying to do things at speed, and yeah, so you're going through maybe the trees, and the consequences are the same as racing. It's like the consequences of it going wrong are not insignificant, and so you're like, right, okay, but so I guess it's just zeroes in the mind, and you've been able to bring that back to your truck driving.
Yeah, I feel like the physical feel of it is very different. There's not a whole lot of that carries over, but on the mental side of things, it helps tremendously just being comfortable being uncomfortable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I hear that phrase. I don't know if I qualify. Like, I definitely feel uncomfortable. Like, whether I'm comfortable about being uncomfortable is not. I mean, like for me, whether or not that's something that I'm ever going to get used to. But I suppose there's an element of confidence in there, isn't there, that comes with your ability to trust yourself to get you through a situation. And in racing, that's definitely a thing. You've got to back yourself to make a move, or you've got to back yourself to commit in qualifying or something like that. So that's really interesting. Yeah.
A good analogy, at least for me, would be describing maybe your mind as an engine. Most engines on road cars aren't set up to be run at full throttle all the time. And when they're at full throttle, they're not necessarily at their best. But if you do things like that, where you push your comfort zone and try new things, get comfortable being uncomfortable, then when you really need to have your brain at the max, full throttle, then it's going to work a fair bit smoother. It's going to feel better. And it almost doesn't feel like it's at full throttle. It feels more normal. It feels regular.
So how do you translate that? Because it's not like you're just going to jump off your mountain bike, put a helmet on and get in the car.
Yeah.
So how do you capture that moment and turn it on, I suppose? I mean, I've got a question here. Yeah, what is the difference between a pro and an am driver? And in your opinion, and I would want to get that, but I think it's kind of related. And in my personal opinion, it's the ability to kind of turn on race driver mode from having a casual chat, and then you put the helmet on and go. And it's kind of it's like not an effort to do that sort of thing. So how do you approach that, and how do you bring some of that mountain bike stuff to the car, so that it's like bang, you're ready from the outlet?
How do I describe this? It just feels, at least for me, there are some drivers that are different, but for me, driving the car, getting on track feels very normal. And you talk to someone, you can joke around, but then there's this sort of transition phase where you start suiting up, put your helmet on, you're like, okay, now it's time to do this, get in the car, go.
So do you feel that, because there is a transition, isn't there, in your mental state? So is that something you have to consciously do, or is it just something like, now I've got my helmet, or now I put my suit on, your mind is kind of shifting off somewhere else, automatically kind of doing that? Or is it when you're actually in the car, you belt it up, or when the engine turns on, or what is it that is stimulating that change?
Normally it's, you start switching over when fairly subconsciously, when you start suiting up, getting everything on, walking out to the car. And then by the time the engine starts, that's when you're in that space. If I've been out of the car for a while, then sometimes it's a little bit more of a conscious process that might take maybe 15, 30 seconds longer. After that, it feels about the same, just getting adjusted and getting used to different things.
Oh, that's really interesting. Let's go back to, sorry, keep on diving off. It's like, this is how these things go. So let's go back to your story, about, so you've got into cars for the first time. I suppose there's a transition between karts and cars.
Oh, a lot happened when I first got into cars. So showed up to the first test with in the US spec F1600 car, and they differ from the UK Formula Ford in that they run full slicks, and it's set up a fair bit softer. But the first thing I noticed when I got in the car compared to karts was how much slower everything was happening. And I think that was one of the biggest adjustments I had to make, because everything was happening so much slower and my inputs had to be slower. Otherwise, it would start to upset the balance of the car a little. And just getting used to like how much longer the corners are, how much bigger the car is. And the first couple laps was just trying to figure out where the edge of the track is versus where the wheels are. And after that, it was very intuitive, but initially it took a little to figure out. And then, how the gears change the balance of the car depending on the corner. Some corners are good with a higher gear, getting the car to float through. Some are better, a lower gear, getting it on the nose, point it in and go. And I think the most different thing completely was, in order to get my FAA license, I did 2 weekends in a spec Miata. And get to the track, the team boss there is like, okay, have you driven stick before? No. Have you ever driven stick on the track or on the road? No. It's like, all right, just go around the pits. So I went around the pits. He's like, all right, seems good to me. First session tomorrow is at 9:30 or whatever. And I think that was the most different thing I've ever had to drive. It felt even slower than the F1600. Everything was happening a lot slower. And it's a very, very different driving style to what I'm used to. That it's not so much about, it's all about your mid corner speed and your exit. And there were so many different driving styles people were using to get the most out of it. Whereas in karts, it's a lot narrower what you're able to do to get the most out of it. And likewise with most formula cars, their deviation.
Did you actually find that quite useful to have that experience? So just to put that in context, a previous show guest, Rob Wilson, he's famous for teaching racing drivers at Formula One, Indycar, at all levels. But he's also famous, in addition to being highly non-technical, with his old phone, but using a road car for it. And the reason he says that he does that is that A, they can sit in comfort and he can chat to them, but also everything's happening that much slower. You just have more time to understand and get a feel for what the car is doing. So did that sort of spec Miata stuff, did that help you learn a little bit more about the car, or was it just frustrating that it wasn't happening quickly enough?
I was there primarily just to finish the race and get my license, so I wasn't pushing all that hard for most of it, but I did learn a fair bit just about how, mainly just on the different gears, how the car reacts. I think what I learned most from those cars was just because you're so close in those, you can race wheel to wheel, you're in the tow, you bump draft, no problem. And I think just pack racing was what I took away from that most. Just being really comfortable right next to another car for 1 or 2 corners at a time, bump drafting. Because before that, in the car, I was at the test day, I'd never really got close to any other cars. It was just me and one other guy.
How did you work out that you could trust the other people? Because it's like, I don't know if that's a sort of a funny question or not, but that is something that happens in these kind of pack racing things. But you kind of develop each car has its own personality that may or may not relate to the same personality that the driver has when you're talking to them in the pits. They're not. There's not always 100% correlation there. So how did you work out like that car? Yeah, I can work with that one, or this one maybe not.
Most, but not all drivers are very different off track than they are on track. But all of them will give you little cues here and there. And how I was able to figure out what cars you can trust and what cars you can is the team I was on was fairly big, so I could talk to most of the other teammates and get a gauge for what they'd be like on the track. Most of the drivers that weekend, as it was a national race, were pretty good. So I was able to trust a fair few of them. But if there was ever a car I was unsure about, I'd get close, pressure them a little, kind of stick my nose in here and there and see how they'd react. If they react very, very aggressively and without much forethought or afterthought, then you can see, okay, I got to be careful with this guy. I got to give him a little more room, or maybe just pressure him into making a mistake or taking advantage of something he does rather than trying to force my way through.
Yeah, that's a very mature approach, to be honest. I mean, when you're talking, it's interesting. There's definitely an assured self-confidence coming through. I would say that you feel like this is for you. I can kind of get that now as we're talking. I can feel like this is what I'm doing. So, what does like a day-to-day thing look like for you? Because you're not racing every day. So, what is the difference between a pro and an amateur driver from that perspective?
From day to day?
Yeah, from day to day, or however you think there is a difference. I mean, what makes the difference? There's a lot of racers, and I probably are in that Spec Miata race, who are very, very good. And then they seem to attract, like those kind of single make races do tend to attract the best drivers. To win in one of those, you really have to have done very well. But so what's the difference between maybe those guys and what you're doing?
I feel like Formula Ford as a feeder series is very unique because it attracts a lot of the young talent, the up and coming people like me, like a couple others. But you also get some very, very quick veterans who've been racing it for a very long time. People like Joey Foster, he drove it last year. Just from driving on track with him, fighting with him for position, I learned a fair bit just from driving with him because has so much experience. I mean, he won the Formula Ford Festival the year I was born.
Well, you can remind him about that, which I'm sure will help with the mind games.
He's won it so many times. I don't think he'd need a reminder, but he's a great guy, a great driver. And it was, even in the feeder series, it was great to be able to, not a feeder series, I should call it, but a series for up and coming talent. It was great to drive with and learn from someone like that. And then there are a couple other drivers like that who've been driving these maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 years and have a lot of knowledge that you can watch and maybe pick things out from.
What kind of things are you looking for? Is it like, I don't know, corner entry, or the way in which they're rotating the car, or the lines that they're taking? What is it that you've seen?
It's like over the course of a lap, it's nothing like by yourself qualifying lap. It's not so much like that, but it's over the course of the weekend when it's like watching them call upon past experiences to figure something unique out.
Have you got an example?
Yeah, I'd say maybe a bit of rain driving as an example, because in Formula Ford, they use a cut slick, and that's run in both wet and dry. So in the wet, it feels very almost akin to driving a kart on slicks in the damp or wet. And you really have to go far offline to find the grip. And if it's my first time at a track in wet conditions, I'll try and go out behind someone who's been there before and watch. And each time it's wet, the track is always different from the last weekend or the weekend before. So you watch them start out on what it was like previously. And then you get to see them make little changes here and there just to get the most out of the car or track, compensate for something, or say, oh, I found this little bit of grip here that helps me on corner exit, but I need to take a funky line to get to it. And just weighing, okay, there's patch grip on the inside, but I have to scrub off a lot of mid-corner speed. Is it worth it? Is it not worth it? And then by the end, they have it figured out, and you get to,
I'm just listening to you, and one of the things that comes across is that there's this constant thirst for learning, and so it's funny because it's like there's obviously a confidence in like your own ability, but equally there's a desire to like I'm still learning stuff here. I'm still learning new things, and so that's kind of an interesting thing. Like because if you're learning something new, it means like there's more headroom in your ability and skill set, yet you're already confident in it. Do you see where I'm going? It's kind of like I think maybe for people listening who aren't professionals at driving, that's nice to hear, basically, from one of another description. Someone who's doing quite well, and they're on the path. They've committed to this as their job, their future career, and yet they're still. Yeah, I'm still learning new things, and I'm actually developing. What you've actually described is a method for learning, right? So it's like without getting too deep about it, but there's another like I'm an engineer, right? So I'm always breaking these things down into processes and things. But what you've done there is you've created a method or process for you to learn about the wet weather driving. Yeah, so that process in itself can improve as well, because it might be that. Well, where's the best place for you to be making these observations? That kind of things. It's maybe you haven't thought about that deeply. That's just the way I think. But
no, I completely understand. I mean, you can apply that to many things, not just wet weather driving, but in the wet weather, it's the most obvious because you can see car, 5 feet offline into a corner, just different every lap. But I feel like that's something. With the professional versus the amateurs or the hobbyists, at least something I've noticed is over the course of the weekend, at the start of the weekend, say it's a new track, everyone's trying to figure something out. The times will all be quite close, but you'll see the professionals or the very experienced drivers, they're always trying something new. They're making changes every session, almost every lap. And the amateurs and the hobbyists don't quite make as many changes. They don't push the envelope quite as much. And they don't, I'm trying to find the words for this. It's almost, they're not exploring the possibilities quite as much. So at the start of the weekend, everyone's very close, but as testing goes on, as the weekend goes on, you'll start to see the gaps grow a little larger.
That's really fascinating. So because I think it takes a lot of confidence to do that. I think it takes confidence to try things because the fear is you'll go slower. And so people go, well, this is what I've got. I'm just going to get the best out of what I've got. And I'll just do that. And I think to get people to try different things, it takes them out of the comfort zone, that could be the theme for our show, But what kind of things do you try? So you mentioned about line, but I've got a question here about the engineering side of the car. So any of the dynamics, do you get involved in any of that? And also use of data and things like that. Have you taught yourself how to look at the data? Is this something that is in your remit? Do you find it useful? That kind of thing. So starting with a car, though, what's your thing on the car? Because you obviously got a team of people who can make changes and give you ideas. Where do you see that priority in terms of understanding the dynamics of the car?
Circling back to it, but gears this past weekend were something and most weekends we play with quite a lot unless we have a ton of laps at a track. Because, for instance, turn one, just general track, obscure place. Normally, or most drivers take it in third. And it feels you're almost at the bottom of third. The car kind of floats through the corner, but doesn't feel quite as planted as maybe some would like. And if you want a more pointy feeling car to make the corner more stop and go, you can drop it down to second. It might drop your minimum speed just a little, but you'll be able to brake later into the corner with more engine braking, and you'll be able to get on the throttle a lot more aggressively. So from corner entry to corner exit, your time will be exactly the same, but on the data, it will look different and the car will feel completely different. In Fords, one of the things we mess around a lot with is the roll bars, just trying to get a good front to rear balance going.
Do you have a preference for that, or is that just something that you go with, like because you've already talked about adapting your driving style. So is that something within, because it's a new car and then new tracks and stuff like that. So which is leading that? Your comfort or what you feel the track needs, or what you feel, is best for the car? Or how do you make those decisions?
Normally, after reviewing video and data, we start to narrow in on what works best for this track with tires and conditions, as I myself tend to prefer a more balanced feeling car with a slight bias towards oversteer. And because from something I did a lot in karting was I would tend to steer the cart more with my feet. Like my hands on the wheel would move very, very little, and I'd just rotate it with the pedals. And in Ford, you don't quite have much power, so you can't do that quite as much, at least in my experience, but you still can rotate the car a fair bit on entry and mid-corner just with the pedals. And if the rear end's too stuck down, I have trouble doing that. Some tracks having a fairly stable back end is fast. And even if I'm not comfortable with it off the bat, if it's what's fast at the track, then it's up to me to make it work. And the team is always there, and all the engineers are there when you're going over data. There's feedback both ways. I try changes with driving, bounce that off them. They try changes with setup, bounce it off me. It's very important to communicate back and forth, because if you're trying something new but not communicating it, they're just going to see, oh, why'd that change?
How do you do that? Have you got any tips for that working with your crew? People listening may not have a formal engineer, but they might have someone who's helping them with the mechanicking side of things, or they might have someone who's trying to help them work this puzzle out of what is the best thing to do. So, we talk about driver feedback and things like that. So any tips for that? And, how do you go about doing it?
In my experience, it's just been like you go out, and if the car does something different or does something noteworthy, just make a mental note of it in the session. And as you try different things, just little adjustments to your driving, just make a note of how that affects things, what happens. Just keep it on the back burner until you're off track, you're going over data. Talk to the mechanic, talk to the engineer, and just be as open and honest as possible. If they ask you, oh, what do you think of this? And you say, honestly, I don't know, but I think it's worth trying. As I had this happen in karts, where after a difficult qualifying session, I felt I had really good pace all through practice, really good pace through all of testing, but then qualifying came around and I thought the kart felt good. Thought it felt completely fine, but then times weren't quite reflecting it. And they're like, you're off pace. Why is that happening? I'm like, I don't know. Balance feels good. I don't know what else could be different.
Here summarizes the majority of people quite often. They come in and it's like, well, I was doing my best, but the times don't show it. So, well, why is that? It's like, I don't know.
And then we checked went over video, and what it was one of the tires had a fairly large blister on it. And as I was driving, it wasn't quite enough to feel a big difference, but what it was doing was dragging a little bit of speed out of it on the straights, just because it wasn't rolling quite as smoothly. And it sounds weird to say it aloud, but, and we almost, when we looked at the data, we're like, okay, everything looks normal. Why is the speed trace 3 miles an hour different? But most of the time, it's not like that. Normally, if something's going well, if something's going not quite well, you're usually able to pinpoint it. You're in the car and you're just like, okay, I'm struggling a bit through turn 5, a little too much front end push, or I'm struggling through this high speed left-hander. I just can't get the rear to stick. The front end goes in, the rear wants to keep me off apex.
Is that the kind of feedback that you're you're kind of trying to communicate is in terms of, so it's not in terms of I want more front bar. It's in terms of this is my feeling in the car at these points in the track. And if it was doing this other thing, I feel as if I could be quicker.
Yeah. And all the mechanics and engineers of the team are, they're all, and at most teams, they're all fantastic. They all know the cars like the back of their hand. And, as a driver coming in and just saying, oh, I want more front bar, that doesn't quite help so much. That doesn't tell them why. It's just, I want this change, but it doesn't tell them what the need for it is, what I'm struggling with.
Yeah. So one of the things that's interesting that I've observed is that because you have driver who might be mechanicking, they're responsible for their car as well. Yeah, they're responsible for the setup of their car as well as driving it, because you're all in, and so what can often happen, which at a professional level in engineering, a race car doesn't happen so much, is a feeling or a need to jump to a solution before we fully understood the problem. So by giving the kind of feedback that you're giving, it really enables people to have a bit more of a conversation around the problem, in inverted commas, and just so that they really understand, like, have we really understood what's going on first? Right, everyone understands, okay, right. The next thing is like, what we're going to do about it? Well, we don't know. But the point is, that's still an achievement to get to that point of like, yes, this is our feeling of what's going on. Yet the data backs up. The driver's got this feeling, because the driver can feel things that the data can't see, which is so super, super important, which is good for you as a driver to have some contribution to the engineering process. But it's also that building that trust and confidence between team and driver, and say, okay, right, we're all on the same net. We're all now understand best we can what is going on. It's either over to you guys, engineers, or now we switch hats and go, right, okay, well, what would help that? What would help that situation? And it's just sometimes there's a confidence bit here, and it's a bit sort of, there's a pride piece in here. So you don't necessarily, like, as a professional, like, your job is to say, like, with no emotion, like, what's going on. But at an amateur level, there's a lot of pride involved as well. It's like, well, because there's always a bit of doubt. It's like, am I actually any good at this? And so the question is like, have I imagined this, or is this a real thing, or whatever? And my view is always like, whatever you feel is valid, and just get that stated out and build this sort of trusting environment, and then we'll work out like whether to act, what to do next. I don't know if that's the experience you've had.
If you're an amateur driver and you feel something and your doubts in your head, like, oh, is it my driving? Is it the car? Say it anyway. If you just keep it in your head and doubt yourself, you're not going to learn anything from it. And if it is your driving, then cool, you can go out and make easy time by fixing it. Like, if you make a mistake, just learn from it. It's okay to make a mistake as long as you only make it once, right?
That's the idea. Yeah, that's the idea. So, I mean, talking that with the driver stuff, I mean, do you have any coaching? Is coaching a thing? I mean, I ask a lot of people, like, how would you define coaching? So I'm going to start with that, and then understand, like, well, do you have any help and that kind of thing? How would you define coaching first?
How would I define coaching? I'd say here's a driver coach, is someone who will go over video with you, go over data with you, and give you the support and tell you what you need to know.
Is a coach distinct from an instructor, or are they the same thing, or are they?
I feel like an instructor is someone who tells you what to do, but a driver coach is a little less clear cut. They'll help with car setup, they'll help with racecraft, they'll go over all the data with you, and post race breakdowns. Okay, you left the door open here, you should be more inside, you should have defended that. Or, oh, this was a good move, just keep that up, keep that forward momentum rolling. You got past him, but you lost maybe a little bit of rhythm, so it took you 2 corners longer to catch the cars in front.
Okay, yeah. So it's breaking that down, your performance down, and helping you clarify things in a way that's trying to build you up.
Yeah, just support, and just even in testing, like, okay, some people are trying a slightly different line in turn 5. It seems like there's more grip on the inside. Go out and try that. And that's a new one for me. It's not something I've ever tried to describe.
Well, so the reason I ask it is because coaching and coaches, it's a thing in motorsport, isn't it? That it's not that. I think it is becoming more common, but it hasn't traditionally been part of the makeup. If you look at other sports, you wouldn't have, a football team without a coach, or you wouldn't have whatever football team it is, American or English or whatever. But you wouldn't, you wouldn't have these kind of other sports without coaching. Coaching is just part of it, and people don't question that. But you go to motorsports, you think, coaching, well, that's kind of a remedial thing. Maybe that's when like your mind isn't working very well, or you need some psychology. So you're not doing something very well. Whereas, I've worked a lot in Olympic sports, and it's very much a performance. So it's like with the right coach, they're going to bring out the best of you more often, quicker, and you're going to love it. You're going to know where you have a plan. They're going to like work everything out. You're going to have a great trust and a bond between them, and overall, you're going to be, you're going to perform better than without them. I mean, otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, I think coaching is a great thing for basically any driver. If it's all, it's just, you have engineers for the car. Why not have an engineer for you?
So the interesting thing, the engineers end up being the coach quite often. So, but maybe not with the empathy, certainly at the professional level, that necessarily a coach may have. I don't know.
Most of the driver coaches I've been, and engineers, teams in general, I've been very fortunate to work with, because they've all been top notch. But each driver coach is different. Each driver is different, and it's up to them to find a good way to communicate. Some drivers can work well with a whole bunch of different coaches who give feedback in different ways. You get some old school coaches like, hey, you're slow in turn 5. Just drive in harder. And some drivers respond very well to that. And some coaches are like, okay, we need to bring up the pace in turn 5. I think you should by braking a little later, using more track on entry, and then, being sure you get to the apex and on power as early as you can. Some coaches are a little softer with the delivery and a little more detailed. Some drivers respond well to that. Some work well with either. And some coaches work well with drivers who give lots and lots of feedback. Some coaches work well with drivers who just say, okay, yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah. How was the car? Fine. Okay.
That's the last thing they want to hear.
Exactly. It was all right. It's like, okay. We're not winning. So what can we do about that?
You have to have that feel. You have to know what's going on. And at least for me, one of the difficult things when I started out in cars and in karts was just car setup, because I could feel things, but I didn't always know what they meant, because my racing experience is relatively small compared to some other drivers. And that's part of the reason why engineers, teammates, driver coaches are so important, is because you can say, oh, I feel this to them. They know, okay, maybe what they're feeling is they need a little bit more rebound damping in the front just to keep the nose in when they're on throttle, or things like that.
Yeah, it's about sort of understanding, putting themselves in your shoes in a way, and then trying to translate that into something that you can do either as an engineering problem or as a psychological problem. Yeah. So where are you heading? What's your goal? Cause we got to you got into cars for the first time, but I'm just aware of the time a little bit. So where are we going to see you in the future, and what one or two things have you got like that you could say, oh, I've seen this. I see drivers do this all the time, and I wonder if they didn't do that, or if they did something different that would really benefit them. And no one seems to realize that. I mean, maybe that's not obvious, but maybe there are some things that you think, actually, I think more people did that, they would go quicker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Where I'll likely be headed next is next year, I'll probably be doing something along the lines of British F or GB3, or back to the US and the Road to Indy series, like in US F2000 or Indy Pro 2000.
Oh, don't go back to America. What do they know about cars? You want to stay in the UK. That's where it's all happening.
There's more rain racing over here, which I quite enjoy, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't stop the races when it rains, It's just like, just keep going.
I mean, we've had some great rain races in the US. It's just the weather over there is quite different. Where I started karting, we had a couple of rain races, but I always got caught out because I never had a rain suit.
Oh, yeah.
This was one weekend I'll never forget, is putting it on the top step of the podium in a rain race with no rain suit, with my legs basically covered in garbage bags and duct tape to keep the water out.
Brilliant.
Then something I think more people should do, just try and learn. Go outside your comfort zone. Learn new things. It'll only help. And, if you make a mistake in testing, you run wide, that lap is slow. Why? Who cares? If you have one slow lap in testing, it's not going to matter. It's testing. You should test things instead of getting stuck in the same rhythm.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, actually. And it's not that easy. I really understand why people don't go outside of their window of comfort. I do. I totally get that. But it is great advice, isn't it? I love that. Testing should be for testing, and it's like, well, and it's not just like how the driver. It's experimenting with the car. I mean, I'm an engineer. I would say that, but just try things, and even if it makes you slower, that's fine, because you're not going to do that again. Or you've learned something. Oh, this change made it slower, because as long as you understand it, I think. My perspective on it is that this idea of controlled experiments, or just experimenting all the time. So even as a driver, as an engineer, we do that like naturally, but as a driver, you may not do that quite as consciously. So just experimenting with things, I think, and trying to learn, I think that's absolutely brilliant. Where can people reach you online? I want to wish you all the best for your journey. Hang out in the UK for as long as you need. Thank you.
If anyone needs to reach me, I have a website, AndreLafondracing.com. Feel free to check that out.
One of the things I liked about your website, he's done a show reel. It's not Andre chatting to the camera. It's literally an overtakes highlight reel. And it's just like, I love that. And some of them are really good. I watched it. I was like, fair play. That was good. I like that move. So yeah, people should go and check that out.
Thank you. I'll be updating that this year, because I've got a couple good ones. Well, I've got a couple from the past weekend, actually. It was a good weekend. Got to the first national podium, which was really exciting.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And I'm fairly active on Instagram, just Andre Lafond Racing or Andre Lafond. You'll find me. If you have any questions or stuff you want to talk about, feel free to reach out.
Oh, that's very kind. I'm sure people will, actually. I think people will be interested to get your perspective. I mean, there's so many, that whole commitment to doing this as a job I think it's a fascinating subject. And for someone at your stage in your career, I think it'd be interesting for people to understand, how you're doing. Maybe, when you're a little bit further along, you come back on the show and you say, "Oh, you remember when I was in Brackley on my headphones?" You'll still talk to us, won't you? When you've risen to the heights. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind doing another one.
Wonderful. Well, look, all the best, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
What a lovely guy Andre is. I certainly wish him every success on his journey to the top of our sport. It was great to have the opportunity to talk with a driver so early in their professional career. What I found interesting was his thirst for learning and our discussion about the importance of being comfortable being uncomfortable, even if that isn't something that I find very easy. I hope you found what Andre had to say as interesting and as helpful as I did when considering your own approach to motorsports. You may know that at the end of season 1, I wrote the Motorsports Playbook, a summary distilling the first 20 shows into nuggets of wisdom. I made the notes so that you don't have to. If you've not got it yet, go and grab yourself a copy from the website. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and visit us at yourdatadriven.com.